Okay, so hey guys, and welcome back to another Axel 72 video, and in today's video I'm going to be giving my reaction to Isaac Cruz drawing against Lamont Roach. And so if you are new around here and you haven't yet subscribed, please do so, like the video if you do indeed like the video, and feel free to join the Patreon as well. You can request any kind of combat sporting related content and I will try my best to get out there for you guys. I really appreciate all the support in which I've had with it so far and all the support in which I've had with the channel recently. You know, it's really been appreciated a lot, and yeah, of course the link will be in the description for the Patreon. And let's get straight into this one though. And I mean, I was really excited for this card when it was first announced, but I mean, I just don't really feel like it's lived up to the potential of what it could be. I mean, there was some great matchups on paper on this card, and of course, I mean, it started all off with Janibek having his positive test, which my prediction video came out for that, of course, you know, before the whole kind of test situation came, so that's why I released it anyway, because there was also my prediction for the Foster fight and for the Ramos Jr. fight on it, so I thought I might as well release it. But yeah, that was strange. You know, I'll touch upon that a little bit more later on, but I just don't really know what's going to happen with Janibek now. But that was, you know, a real dampener because I was really excited for that fight. And then Fulton missing weight as well, which I thought was just really unprofessional and just crazy how it was allowed to happen, because, you know, Fulton was moving up in weight in the first place, and, you know, he seemed to just struggle making the weight. And I mean, Lamont Roach, he was moving up in weight from the lightweight division, and he'd previously moved up from, of course, the super featherweight division, and he was able to move up in two weight divisions similar to Fulton, and he was able to do it in more impressive fashion, and he was able to do it properly, and he was able to do it so he still looked good. And that's what, you know, that's how you do it professionally and properly. But Fulton didn't do that. He looked very poor. And like I say, I'll touch more upon that as well in a minute when I speak about that fight. And I mean, the whole card as well, I mean, there was a lack of stoppages. When you've got power punches like your Roach Juniors, your Laras, your Isaac Cruz, you kind of want the kind of drama and the power punches and stuff like that, and especially for the Lara fight as well, I felt like that really could have ended up in a stoppage with his opponent coming in on short notice and things like that. But again, I'll touch on that a bit more in a minute. But just as a whole, the card did kind of disappoint, to be fair, which, I don't know, just was a bit of a shame. There were some good moments, but like I say, for the most part, in my opinion, I feel like it did disappoint. But to touch upon the main event, which was a good fight, to be fair, I mean, like I say, Lamont Roach was able to come in good at his new weight, and Cruz, I mean, he showed his power early, and Roach finally showed a bit of weakness against a power puncher. Of course, he didn't really seem to struggle too much with the power of Gervonta Davis when he fought him, but of course, Cruz was able to drop him and kind of give him the Bambi legs, where we weren't too sure if he was going to fall all the way down or not. But he did, of course, touch the canvas, and then, rightfully so, the referee got involved, just like it should have happened when, you know, Gervonta Davis touched the canvas against Lamont Roach. But yeah, it was the first time which we've seen a bit of weakness from the Lamont Roach in the way of dealing with the power, and perhaps, you know, coming up in weight, he might have to deal with that a little bit more. But again, we just kind of saw Cruz not being able to keep up the tempo in the fight, and he kind of allowed his opponent to win a lot of the later rounds. And after he dropped Roach, and, you know, he was looking good up to that point, but like I say, after he dropped him, Roach started boxing. Cruz was trying to get behind his jab and work it, and, you know, I don't hate that he was trying to box a bit more, but it just wasn't really working. You know, Roach clearly as a boxer was levels above, and, you know, that was evident again into the later rounds when, you know, I think it was the final round where Cruz actually started to be a bit more aggressive again, and he was actually able to push back Roach a bit. But I mean, there was times in which Roach was doing good work as well. I think he was twisting into his shots nicer, which is something in which I haven't really seen too much from Roach. Actually, you know, he landed a nice shot of his own where, you know, he was kind of twisting into that left quite well. Maybe after that he did start to rely on it a little bit too much, and like I say, it worked once and then he was trying to go for it over and over again. Maybe that's just because of the fact that we haven't really seen Lamont Roach cause many fighters problems power-wise so far. Well, like I say, in more recent fights, like I said, the last 2 fights of his. And he maybe got a little bit excited that he could have actually, caused a bit of damage to Isaac Cruz, and he did do that. But again, then he, like I say, started to do that a little bit more, and it was nice to see him trying to stand his ground. But I think his game plan could have been better if he was actually boxing and moving with his jab. He was on the back foot for the most part, but it wasn't like a Jose Valenzuela performance when he beat Cruz, where Valenzuela was, willingly letting Cruz kind of swing himself in and then, adjusting, moving around and resetting back to the centre of the ring. Lamont Roach was trying to stand his ground a bit more, which again I respect, but maybe this was actually one of the fights in which could have gone into a bit more of a boring fashion and then, could have led on to Lamont Roach actually going out there and winning. But at the same time, Roach has now got back-to-back draws in fights. So, I mean, you can argue that he hasn't had the best of luck. And you can also argue that maybe his power lets him down from kind of separating himself from his opponents when he's in these big fights. I mean, obviously, like I've said, he's fought 2 power punchers at the kind of elite level in Davis and Cruz, and of course he's not been able to really cause them any kind of problems with his power due to kind of the lack of it, to be fair. And like I said, I just feel like he hasn't been able to separate himself, whereas, that is something in which, of course, Isaac Cruz can rely on a bit if things aren't going that well. He can resort to his power, which he does have, and he can catch you out of nowhere, whereas Roach, of course, has never had that in his arsenal. So that's where, if he is going to try and start being that bit more of a power puncher and sitting down on his shots, he really has to make them shots count, which, again, he just didn't do enough in this fight, in my opinion, to kind of really deserve put himself clear in the lead. He was doing good, and like I say, it was definitely a fight in which it was difficult to score. I mean, I've seen multiple people say that they thought that Roach won, and multiple people say that they thought that Cruz won. But again, it shows that there is kind of a rematch there to be made, and I do think the rematch will be made, or at least they should, as it's a good fight to kind of make for a rematch. And I think it does also leave enough time for the WBC to kind of sort out what they're doing with the super lightweight belt at the moment, because I think it is a little bit messy. Of course, Smith is fighting Matias, which of course we thought might not be happening with the whole Matias kind of testing positive and then having contamination, but then also still being on probation situation. But, of course that fight's happening. And then Puello is been ordered as a mandatory, from what I believe, in this most recent week with WBC's convention, which again doesn't really make any sense because technically Cruz is the interim champion, so why are they making another person a mandatory? Again, that's weird. But like I say, with this going to a draw this fight, it means that they can make the rematch probably in springtime or something like that, and then that allows for the January fight for Smith and Matias to be done. Then that fight can play out, and then Matias can maybe, well, if he beats Smith or if Smith beats Matias, they can fight Puello in the summer, and then at the back end of next year, the winner of Roach versus Cruz 2, and whoever's champion at that point can then go on to fight each other and can make for a good fight. At least, that would be, in an ideal situation, how it will all kind of play out. But of course, in boxing, things never really work out that easily. Moving on to speak about the co-main event now. And of course, I think this was, in my opinion, the fight that was actually most exciting, I suppose. Well, not in the actual fight, but I mean like the actual build-up and with everything that happened with Fulton, like I say, missing weight, which, like I say, I'll touch upon in a second. But there was definitely a lot of people, and you could tell that the bookies were getting a lot of people suddenly choosing Foster as their person to win, with the state in which Fulton looked on the scales. I feel like that's what most kind of betting people go for when they, look at betting for a fight. If they can see somebody clearly struggling on the weight, then that's basically a given factor that you should go for the other fighter, to be fair, and that normally does play out pretty well. But this was a really great performance from Foster, in my opinion. He was dominating with his jab, his range control, and Fulton looked really bad. He had zero movement, pretty much no pop in his shots. Like I say, all the things in which we've kind of gotten used to seeing Fulton being able to be good at. He just looked poor. He was just kind of walking onto a lot of shots. He had his hands high at least, but he was not really doing much except from getting hit. And I mean, as soon as I saw, and everybody saw how bad Fulton looked on, weigh-in day and at the weight, they all knew that this would happen. I'm just kind of surprised, to be fair, that Foster didn't go out there and manage to get the stoppage. Like I say, Foster put on a very good game plan. His southpaw style was difficult for Fulton to be able to deal with, but like I say, he just couldn't get any of his shots going, and Foster did completely dominate. And I mean, it will be interesting to see if Foster will go on to try and become champion at lightweight, because I mean, I don't really know how it works and how this has ended up happening, but of course, this has ended up being for, I think it is a WBC interim world lightweight title fight, which again is very strange to me how that's ended up happening, because I thought that, I don't know how that's ended up happening, to be fair, but so that means that currently we have Oshaki Foster as a super featherweight champion and as a lightweight interim champion, which normally isn't allowed to happen. And again, that's weird. But I do think, yes, Fulton looked very poor in this fight, but Foster, this was his best performance and his best skilled fight that we've seen, at least in my opinion, in his past 5 fights. I mean, he fought Hernandez in an absolutely brutal fight where he had to dig deep and get a really impressive stoppage late on. But in the actual way of a performance, he still took a lot of punishment in that fight before he went on to win. And then he also, like I say, fought Conceição twice in 2 close fights. He fought Nova in a close fight as well. But this just wasn't a close fight at all. So maybe he's going to want to stay at the lightweight division. Again, a lot of fighters don't want to move back down in weight if they can have success in the higher weight division. Of course, that's normally the case for pretty much every fighter. And Oshaki Foster, he might want to stay in the lightweight division, and that means he might vacate his super featherweight division. But again, I don't know why you would have this fight as an interim title fight, because with Foster now being a champion in super feather and a interim champion in lightweight, it means that he's going to have to vacate one of them. So there's no real point in having them both there. I don't know. It's just a bit weird, in my opinion, how that has kind of been allowed to go through. But with Fulton, I mean, I don't know how his team allowed him to be coming into that fight in the condition in which he was coming into it. I mean, at the weigh-in, he just looked really bad at the weigh. He physically looked poor, and I'm not sure what will happen with his career next now. I mean, I don't know what weight he is wanting to make anymore, and I have really no idea why he tried to move up in weight in the first place. Of course, somebody like Lamont Roach, he did the same thing. Like I say, he moved up in 2 weight divisions, but when we saw Fulton move up into the featherweight division for the first time, when he fought Castro, that was a real tough fight, and he had to work hard in that fight. And then he fought Figueroa, and that was a really good performance from Fulton. Or at least, a much better performance from Fulton, at least in my opinion it was, against a tough fighter in Brandon Figueroa. And that's where I was thinking, this could be a good chance for him to be able to kind of keep a run as a featherweight champion. So, like I said, I just don't know why he wanted to go up again to fight in the super featherweight division when he just looked good in the featherweight division and he was champion. So again, I don't know if he's going to want to go back down. I don't know. I don't think he's still champion there in the featherweight division anymore. I have no idea, to be honest. There's so many belts, I get confused sometimes. Maybe he still is, and that's why he might go back down and try and defend that. But can he even make that weight anymore? I don't know. He's really going to have to get a good conditioning team going for him to be able to make that weight well, if he is going to try and do it. Or is he just going to try and campaign at lightweight from now on and try and get himself a bit more, bigger and better looking at that weight? Again, I have no idea. But it will be interesting to see. But again, I feel like nobody's really too excited to see Stephen Fulton back after that performance. Moving on to speak about the Erislandy Lara versus Johan Gonzalez fight, which was, of course, the late replacement opponent for Janibek, in which I will talk a bit more about in a minute. But this fight ended with Erislandy Lara pretty much dominating for the most part and getting a unanimous decision with a late knockdown and an early knockdown in the first and the last round. But it is a bit of a shame that Lara wasn't able to get a stoppage against Gonzalez, because Gonzalez had been stopped against a lesser opponent coming into this one. He was coming in on such short notice, and I mean, with Lara, he was pretty much hurting Gonzalez on every time he threw, and every occasion in which he hit him, he was hurting him. And I understand that Lara is 42 years of age, and I understand that he's not trying to blow his gas tank out, and he's not trying to, really go out there and force a big stoppage. He's trying to make it happen, but he just looks so like he was trying to be just nonchalantly doing it, like he was posing after getting a knockdown. And it's impressive that he has that power and still is able to carry it and distribute it that well, but he really could have turned it up at some point to just be able to go out there and get a knockout. He could have got a first round knockout if he really wanted to have just turned it up, but it just looked like Lara didn't want to do much at all, and he was trying to just win the fight the easiest way in which he could, which would have been so much easier if he actually would have turned up the pace a little bit, but he just looked like he was trying to fight nonchalantly. And I mean, it worked out for him. Again, he dominated. His opponent was poor. He, like I say, hurt him with pretty much every shot in which he threw, but there was times in which Gonzalez was allowed to come back into it just by throwing more, because Lara was just covering up and waiting. There really wasn't much thrown from Lara in this fight, and again, that's what I feel like doesn't fill me with much hope if we are to see a Lara face, another opponent who is a better opponent. If it's a Janibek, if that's ever going to happen, or if it's an Adamus, or I mean, there's not really that many good fighters that are really exciting around in the middleweight division. I mean, if he fights Aaron McKenna, that would be, a good fight there. But again, just I don't know what would happen. But I don't know. I just don't feel confident watching him fight. Obviously, like I said, the power's always been there, and that's the reason why he's in this position, due to his power. But otherwise, he looks very slow. Other than, like I said, the explosive shots in which he occasionally lands, his actual footwork, he doesn't really have any of that anymore. He just covers up and loads up and waits for the right moment, and he does always find the right moment, but maybe there'll be a time in which his opponents won't just fall down straight away after getting hit by him. And with the whole Janibek situation, it isn't a good look at all. Of course, it's not a good look for any fighter having this happen, but doesn't make sense as to why he would have wanted to do any sort of drugs or anything like that before a big fight like this, because he's been calling for this shot for so long. Why would he do anything to risk having the fight called off? It just doesn't make sense to me. So, I hope the whole hit situation can be made public, but if it does get cleared and, nothing is, there's no kind of punishment or anything, I'm sure it will be mentioned as contamination, and it will just be moved on like it is for the majority of the time in which any kind of drugs event happens. I mean, of course, that's just happened with Matthias, and again, there's a lot of controversy around that at the moment. But I mean, Janibek, otherwise, he could just possibly have a kind of sentence in the background. If we don't see him fight for a year, then that will be why. Even if it's not made public, that will be why. He hasn't, when Matthias tested positive, at least Matthias went online and said stuff. I don't think, from what I've heard or for what I've seen, that Janibek has actually gone out there and said that it's, he's not ever done anything like this. But again, it just doesn't make sense, in my opinion, as to why now this is the moment. Has he always been doing it? Is that why he's been so good? I don't know. I feel like there was just no point as to why that would have happened now if he has just started doing it for such a big fight like this, where I still think he, was favourite coming into this fight. And again, it's just weird in my opinion. But with the rest of the middleweight division, I mean, if the belts are going to become vacant, then again, the middleweight division is poor, and if they become vacant, then that means it would be definitely interesting to see what happens and who gets ordered to fight for the belts, because of course Janibek is currently a unified champion, so who will be allowed to fight for the belts if they become vacant? Again, that will be interesting to see. And I mean, with, again, talking about the state of the division, how long can Erislandy Lara, a 42-year-old champion, remain champion for? Because, I mean, with the WBA, the rankings probably could favour him having a few more easier matchups, to be fair. I mean, there's a few good fighters coming through who are, quite, unknown at the moment. A couple good Cuban fighters coming through, which could definitely cause problems to Erislandy Lara, but I mean, he could probably just find his way through quite a few more easy matchups before he actually gets tested against another elite level guy, and he could just get away with that. So again, 42-year-old current oldest champion alongside Badu Jack, he could just actually be champion for quite a while again if this whole Janibek situation results in Janibek not being able to fight for a while, and that will be interesting to see. And moving on to the final fight in which we're going to be speaking about on this card, of course, it was Shane Mosley Jr. versus Jesus Ramos Jr., and it was for the interim WBC World Middleweight title, and Jesus Ramos Jr. won via unanimous decision. This was a better fight than I expected, to be fair, and I actually think was the most entertaining fight on this card. I think the move up in weight, well, except from the big knockout of Frank Martin, which was, of course, a big moment as well on this card. But I think the move up in weight did lead to Ramos getting surprised a bit. He got caught with a shot which was kind of the first time in which we've seen him get rocked, as well as, I also did think he looked a bit slower as well. He still won a lot of the rounds and wobbled Mosley Jr. on a couple of occasions. Not enough, though, to get a stoppage, which was interesting to see because, of course, he's been able to do that in the lower weight divisions. But I'm not sure just yet if I'm wanting to see Jesus Ramos Jr. get a title shot. It would be an entertaining war again, if he was to go out there and face Carlos Adames, but Carlos Adames has now proven himself as a champion after getting that draw against Hamza Shiraz. So, I mean, maybe one more high up there contender, maybe a bit better of a contender than Shane Mosley Jr. Again, like I said, there's not loads in the division. Wouldn't go amiss. For Jesus Ramos Jr. But again, possibly Ramos Jr. could get himself put into a vacant title situation. It is a shame that he is the WBC interim champion. If he was a WBO interim champion or an IBF one, then he would be probably first in line to fight for a vacant title if they do become vacant. But of course, he will have to wait and see. And if not, maybe, Adames hasn't really got a tremendous amount of names available. So maybe it is about time for a Ramos Jr. versus an Adames. But like I say, it wouldn't harm his career, Ramos, if he did have one more, because like I said, they did show some slight vulnerabilities in which we haven't really seen too much, bar the loss against Lubin, which was, a pretty controversial loss anyway. We haven't really seen him struggle that much. And he didn't really struggle in this fight, but he didn't have it as easy as what I thought he would have against Shane Mosley Jr., who, of course, he's somebody who has always had the pressure and the hype around him to follow in his dad's footsteps, but he's just never really been able to. And I think he's a solid fighter, but not an elite level fighter. And I don't think he ever will be an elite level fighter. And for Mosley Jr., I think he is just going to be kind of sticking around at that point in the middleweight division at the moment, not really progressing too much along. But again, I thought Ramos Jr. would have been able to go out there and actually get a stoppage, which again, like I say, he almost did, but not quite. But yeah, that is it for today's video. Of course, like the video if you didn't like the video, subscribe if you're new, and thanks for watching.